Good afternoon, everybody. This is definitely not my comfort zone. I would probably be on the pitch right now, but Tag's asked me to speak a little bit about athletic skills and how we can incorporate them into rugby performance. The last time I was on this stage, I was the MC of Wellington's Got Talent, doing like mad tricks and stuff on stage. This is a little bit different to how I was then. But so the outline today is I'm going to run through how we can incorporate athletic skills into kind of our rugby training, probably from a coach's angle more specifically. So how, if you don't have an S&C coach to support you on pitch, how you can kind of incorporate some of these athletic skills that we need to prioritise with developing female athletes and specifically into that. So I'm going to start with a little bit of an outline about why athletic skills are important, what athletic skills are, why they are specifically important to developing female athletes. So we're going to sort of look around the sort of relative strength that you might have with a female athlete versus a male athlete. I know Don's touched on training age specifically, and that's something that, with my experience with the developing under 18s, we've specifically noticed. That's to clarify, I'm the under 18s S&C coach with England, if that wasn't clear. And then I'll kind of run through how I would look to incorporate athletic skills into a warm-up. So we'll go through generic warm-up design, and then we'll head outside and we'll do the bit that I really do like doing on pitch with some players, and we'll kind of have a look at it in context, which hopefully will be a lot more valuable. So I'm sure Don's kind of showed this already, but this is really important to kind of always reiterate, and it's something that when I go around to Centre of Excellence, we kind of try to keep talking about. It's basically the girls that we're looking at are DPP under 18. They've got such a long way to go before they get to the top, but that also is a very long number of years, and quite often we're seeing girls that are having their playing time prioritised, so trying to get maximum game time, trying to improve their rugby skills on the pitch, which of course is essential for their rugby development, but often we're seeing their physical capabilities not being progressed and challenged in the same way. So for me, obviously as an S&C coach, the physicality and the physical development is kind of paramount, but also that does lend itself to their rugby development. When we as S&C coaches look at athletic skills, we look at what athletic actions underpin performance on the rugby field. So if we're looking at a breakdown drill, what do I need my player physically to be able to do to be successful in that specific action? How can I then develop that off the field in the gym? How can I develop that on pitch in my warm-ups to make sure that they're the most effective they can be? So the real thing to take from this is that a 16-year-old, an 18-year-old has got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years until they need to be in sort of peak physical performance. We need to actually consider their development long-term and actually start them out with really simple, really basic exercises, learning how to land, learning how to move, learning how to fall, how to control their own body. I don't want to see a 16-year-old back squatting absolutely massive amounts of weight with really poor technique that's actually going to do them more of a hindrance as they go forward, because we'll get to that. But like we're saying in rugby, you have to earn the right to do things. Same thing applies with S&C and physical development. So as part of the kind of work we've been doing, we're putting together an athletic development curriculum. And now there's two angles to the athletic curriculum. There's the higher level, the higher performance curriculum, which our Red Roses and the sort of higher level 20s and the girls in the AP 15s work towards. But we thought it was really important to actually create a specific development framework for our younger athletes that prioritises some of the areas that I've just spoken about, so their physical development and the real kind of fundamental sort of foundations of athletic performance. So real basic things like their aerobic capacity, their local muscular endurance, their ability to control their own body in space. We ask 16, 17, 18-year-old girls to put their bodies in quite weird positions on the pitch and to tolerate quite a high level of contact and sort of physical abuse essentially, and we need them to be able to be strong enough to keep them on the pitch, because at the end of the day that's what we want them to be able to do, to get on the pitch, to stay on the pitch, to enjoy playing rugby and to progress as far as they can and they want to. So we're in this kind of lower kind of area, this sort of exploring rugby, exploring their boundaries. That's our kind of tagline with the under 18s, we're exploring boundaries. You know, we say to them, you know, if you've got an exit play, an exit is not always a kick. See if you can run it, explore your boundaries, see what you can do a little bit differently. Like, it's not all about prescriptive play. When you get to higher levels, you will be very prescribed. Down to the sort of developing players, we want them to kind of challenge themselves, push their own boundaries and kind of see what they're capable of, and then we'll sort of go from there. So specifically looking at female athletes, Don probably mentioned it, I didn't get the whole of his presentation, but our female athletes generally, in terms of rugby and specifically with S&C, will have a younger training age, and that's really noticeable. The other thing that I find with female athletes, and I'm not sure if there's evidence to suggest this, but female athletes tend to be just less inclined to, at the start of the session, go and kick a ball around. You'll get a few of them that will, but they'll kind of huddle in the corner and have a bit of a chat and sort of catch up with their mates, which, you know, I'm a girl, I like to do that. But you'll find lads will just go onto the pitch, kick a ball around, and there's always that little bit of sort of stimulus, that little bit of further athletic development. So a 17-year-old girl and a 17-year-old boy will have very, very different athletic skills and sort of physical development and training ages, and that's something that, having worked across both, I've really identified this year as being really important to consider. We always talk about younger athletes not being just mini adults. The girls, we can't just prescribe what the boys do. We can't just do what the boys do. It's a very different space. The girls mature at different rates. So we need to actually consider them at the sort of point they're at. And that varies whether they're at DPP or they're under 18 or beyond. Along with that, obviously, we all probably kind of know the issues with the women's game is there's not the volume of players. There's not the same sort of access to games. I know with some of my players, they've played far less matches this season than some of the other players. Like, you have some players that have played a match every week and some players that might play 1 or 2 a month. So the actual exposure to rugby training and rugby games is massively varied. And that's something that we, as under 18s with the England team, we actually track that. So we keep a log of how many minutes they're doing, so that actually if they're a little bit undercooked, we can try and get them some more rugby. Or if they're at somewhere where they've got access to plenty of games, we're not overloading them, because not only do we consider the bottom, we also need to consider the top, that we're not burning these potentially quite promising players out too early. Something that is also really evident is that in lower limbs, girls tend to be, relative to their body weight, comparable to males. So I always sort of talk about that in the gym. But upper strength is generally lower, and that's obviously something with rugby. Shoulder sort of strength, shoulder stability is something that we need to be particularly aware of. So that's why whenever we get the girls in the gym, upper body strength for me becomes a massive thing that we work on. If we're not going to ever be able to get them relatively the same strength as the boys might be, we're going to make the girls as strong as they can be as individuals. And we focus a lot on stability and sort of strength in sort of those specific rugby positions, dangerous positions as we might call them. The other things that we see is, like, there's anecdotally probably a higher incidence of knee injuries and lower limb injuries with women. Whether that comes from differences in strength, whether that comes from a lower training age, potentially, there's lots of factors that contribute to that, but we see quite a lot of lower limb injuries. So part of what we want to do as sort of physical development coaches is do what we can to sort of protect against that, so that if we do get lower limb injuries, they're coming from the contact elements, they're not coming from poor athletic development. So basically, this whole kind of thing is we need to consider an athletic development framework that targets these key athletic skills that we'll see on a rugby pitch, but also allows the athletes to develop as along that sort of long pathway up until sort of senior rugby. We want to keep them robust, we want to keep them on the pitch, we want to do a lot of things around neck strengthening, we want to do upper body like I've spoken about, lower limb strengthening, to make sure that we can actually keep them on the pitch, and we want them to be as athletic as they possibly can be. So there's multiple kind of athletic skills that we can talk about, and these are going to be coming out from the S&C angle, but hopefully as we kind of progress, you'll see how this fits into the kind of rugby context. For me, I always work down from the pitch, so if my rugby coach says to me we're going to be doing contact today, it's all about, right, what positions, what athletic skills, what movements, what qualities are my players going to need on pitch, and then I work back from there to how I can develop them. That might be on a sort of one single session, but then when I'm looking at the full year, and obviously we're looking at that, we can program throughout the entire year to make sure that throughout the year our players progress in these kind of key areas. So body shape management, like I said, girls get into some sort of interesting positions, like never in a normal daily life where you'd be scrummaging. So actually getting them strong in that specific position is something we need to work on. If they're over the ball, again, something that needs to be strong and stable, and they can take contact in that. Jumping and landing, obviously we've got really strange scenarios where we throw girls miles into the air and then they have to land effectively. And obviously that chance of them coming down and injuring themselves when they come down from a line out is probably pretty high. So if we can sort of coach those athletic skills and develop that ability to decelerate, that ability to land safely and effectively, we can hopefully make them a little bit safe in the line out, but hopefully a little bit more effective as well if they can jump that little bit higher than the opposition. Linear speed, so often, kick chase, things like that, who's going to score the tries, whoever's going to get there fastest, and that applies to a lot of things. So if we can actually start pushing linear speed and developing the players, they're going to be more effective on the pitch. Similarly with linear speed, there's evidence to suggest that if we get girls sprinting, not just girls, if we get athletes sprinting regularly, we're actually going to protect them against some of those soft tissue injuries like hamstrings that are commonly seen in sort of the higher levels of the game. Collision and contact is a big area that we need to sort of prepare these players for, not just being able to be in a scrum, not just being able to get over the ball, but actually being able to roll, being able to fall, being able to land effectively. You just put some players into a drill where they have to land on their back and you'll already see girls without the control of the neck, and then we're worried about concussions. Everything we need to do is like educate them around falling, landing, controlling their body while they take contact, while they're going into collisions. Multi-directional speed is something that's obviously relevant, getting around defenders, potentially probably more with your kind of back three, your backs, but also something that our forwards we try and push as well. And then strength and power, so obviously this will underpin everything, like stronger players are going to be more effective in collisions, they're going to be able to hold their own body weight, they're going to be able to knock opposition, they're going to be able to tackle them out the way, so that's something that we'll always push. But then also foundational movement, so all of this is really important, but your player off the pitch needs to be able to actually move their body in space effectively. They need to not have any imbalances left to right, they need to be strong in sort of a range of positions and be competent moving their body around the space. So we'll always train technical skills on a rugby pitch. You'll always come on, you'll always do tackle practice, you'll do breakdown practice, you'll do evasion skills, catch pass. But we also need to train those athletic skills because at the end of the day, they do underpin a lot of sort of success that we see on a rugby pitch. So as part of the curriculum, we've got sort of 4 key areas that we look at. So we've got our movement competency, of which we've put together a bit of a framework. If you work with C of E's, this will actually be being shared hopefully in the near future. Of a kind of framework where we'll actually sort of level our players. So we'll go, right, this person in their squat pattern, probably a level 1, they're not very competent in that just yet. But actually if we put them in a hinge pattern, they're really good. But this allows us to build a picture of each individual athlete and athletically sort of in their movements where they kind of sit. We're also going to look at their general strength. So we're going to obviously still prioritise developing strength. But again, we're going to concentrate on an upper body push and upper body pull, and some lower body hinging, squatting. But we're actually going to get that rather than from specific testing days where I get a player in and go, right, today you're going to do a 3-rep max. We're actually going to take that throughout the year. We're going to look at what they're lifting consistently in their gym sessions. It's often hard to perform on one day, so I'd rather see how our players are developing throughout the year and we're seeing a general progression in strength rather than on one day, how much can you lift. We're also going to look at their local muscular strength endurance, trying to build that robustness that does keep them on the fields. So we're going to look at lower limb, upper limb, the trunk stability and also their neck strength because like we've mentioned and I'm sure you've all heard, quite essential hopefully to reducing concussions in the game. And then aerobic capacity is the kind of the area of conditioning that we'll be focusing on with these girls. As we get to higher levels we'll look at more kind of sprinting, repeated abilities, but at the end of the day we need these girls to be able to run around on the pitch for 70 minutes, tolerate that and still be effective in the 69th minute as they are in the first. There's quite a lot of detail in this, so I'm probably just flash these up on screen. This is more to be sort of fed into the S&C coaches. But these are our sort of key areas that I've kind of spoken about already. So we've got 5 key areas, our linear movement, so straight line speed. Our foundational movement, so this is our squat pattern, our lunge pattern, hinging, bridging, pushing, pulling, and another area that, having spoken to sort of the Red Roses S&Cs and sort of throughout the pathway, the ability to move in the frontal plane, so lateral movement. Jumping and landing, as we've spoken about already, and the multi-directional movement, very relevant for on-pitch and something that potentially we need to target a little bit more with the girls, and then collision and body management. So the foundational movements, as I spoke about, we're hoping to be able to sort of take each of our players, especially with the England girls, and put them in sort of different levels. So if they're competent in a counterbalance squat, they've done level 1. If they progress to level 2 and they can goblet squat, if they can goblet squat with 0.5 of their own body weight, we might say that an athlete is competent then, and then they'll gradually move up this framework. And hopefully, if we have a player that exits under 18s and progresses to under 20s, I could go to the S&C coach and be like, right, my player is in a squat, she's level 3. She can't quite front squat 0.7 of her body weight yet, but she's getting there. And then they'll be able to really target that S&C program to that individual athlete to ensure that we're not progressing them at a rate that is too fast for them. So we're actually focusing on the individual athlete rather than just a generic program. And our general progression just goes from body weight to a dumbbell goblet to a dumbbell to a barbell. That's probably more aimed at the S&Cs, but it's just kind of useful to know how we kind of progress that. We've got a plyometric continuum that exists. So this is for how we sort of train that jumping and landing. A lot of sort of information here, and it's come from a really good article, this specific continuum. But basically, as with everything, we start small, we start low, we start with the ability to slow down, to decelerate, before we then start to throw ourselves in the air, because we don't really want to go up if we can't land safely. Progressions through linear speed, so these are specific drills that will target acceleration and maximum velocity, so stuff that throughout the year within the under 18s we'll be periodising. So we'll start in August, we will start with wall drills, we'll start with a 3-point stance, we'll start with skips for height, and we will not progress until these athletes show the competency in these areas. It's a key thing for me is that we don't move on too early. I'm not just going to go, right, this camp we'll do wall drill and next time we'll do a single switch. If when I do the wall drills, none of the players are competent, we're not going to accelerate them if they're not ready to take that next stage. We've got a few sort of portions of multi-directional speed. There's a lot of detail within this that I'm not going to go into, but these are some of the areas that we will progress our players through. Too far. Rather than a progression as such, I've put together almost like a toolbox for collision and body management. So different ways that we can challenge players to control their bodies in space, tolerate contact, absorb force, and sort of try and drive a little bit more intent within contact. It's definitely something I've noticed working with male athletes and female athletes, is girls don't really want to rip the ball off each other in a warm-up, so you have to really get behind them and think about ways you can challenge them and see if you can add some competition, add a bit of intent, and really get that kind of drive from them. This will be something that will be rolling out as well when we bring together the C of S&C sort of handbook, essentially, is what C of E assessments we're going to be doing. So 3 times a year we want to assess those players because we want to see throughout the year how they're progressing. I kind of mentioned we're not going to do the strength testing on that one day, but we will be doing things like local muscular endurance, we will be doing 1200 metres and things like that, just so we can keep an eye on, are these players developing? If we've got an England player who's coming in and out of the pathway, are they still developing when they go away from us? Because obviously, probably like 95% of the time, I don't actually have eyes on these players, which as an S&C coach that's used to working with players day to day can be quite difficult. So probably the main bit that this kind of has been leading to is how we can actually incorporate developing these athletic skills into our practice. And the bit that I'm going to specifically focus on today is how we can target warm-ups. Because warm-ups present a really good opportunity to incorporate and progress athletic skills. You know, 10, 15 minutes at the start of a session, it doesn't detract from your main rugby content, but it does mean that you can actually develop athletic skills. So personally, when I go through my warm-up design, I go through kind of 4 key stages. So stage 1 is speaking to my technical coach. So actually going to a technical coach, what is the aim of today's session? What do you want to get from it? What is the rugby goals? What are the technical, what are the tactical kind of requirements? And the outline for that session. Stage 2 would then be, so what are these technical skills being developed? And therefore, what physical requirements do my players have on that field? And what athletic skills will underpin them being successful in those? So if we are going into contact, what specific things do I need my player to develop to be able to be effective in contact, if that's breakdown, if that's tackle? So therefore, I'll then have a good idea. I've kind of got my overview, and then I'll design my warm-up based on the RAMP framework, which we'll go into in a second. So there's kind of two angles to this. So as an S&C coach, yes, I need to prepare them for the technical session, but I still need to sort of adequately prepare them physically for that session. So they're going to get warm, they're going to have a bit of fun, they're going to get switched on, but they are going to also be physically prepared for the rugby. This is also the opportunity to maybe feed in a little bit more athletic development sort of long term. So this will be where I'll go, right, I've got 2 minutes to do a little bit of linear speed development. What am I going to do today to sort of progress that? And then stage 4, once I've reviewed it and seen how those players have dealt with that linear speed drill I've done that day, how do we then progress it next week? How do we then progress it a month later? How do we progress it a year or 2 down the line? My players at the minute are not going to be doing really complicated wicket drills and things like that that are way beyond their capability. That might be something we build them to in 2-3 years. It's, for me, a big thing I've learned is about sort of being patient and actually waiting till players show the physical sort of requirements and the physical competencies in these kind of areas. So as a rugby coach, this will kind of be the main part of your session. You'll have some activities, probably the main sort of technical elements. That might be where you get your coaching across, and then you'll have some games where you actually put those players into the scenarios. and then have an evaluation of the session. Did you get from the session exactly what you wanted? Did the players execute this skill? Did you see improvement in body height in contact? So therefore, this is what's the kind of, I'd say, the main chunk of the session, but this is the bit that I want to talk about, the ability to sort of warm the player up for that main session. So we're looking at raising the body temperature, going into our activation and mobility, and then potentiation. The thing I have with warm-ups is I always want a warm-up to be fun. Like we're building to France tomorrow. We've obviously got probably our biggest game of the year tomorrow. And our warm-up yesterday, we played loads of games because it's still specific to rugby. Actually, if we get the girls playing some variation of tag where they're actually evading, they're avoiding their opposition, they're having to make quick decisions, that's really actually relevant to rugby. It's much more useful than just sending them for a lap around the pitch. Yes, they will both achieve an elevation in body temperature. Yes, they'll both sort of improve joint mobility, but one of them is a little bit more rugby specific, and it means that for those 2 minutes that you have with that player at the start, we're not wasting that time, we are making it as rugby specific as we can. Similarly with the activate and mobilise, if I'm doing a contact-based session, I'm going to ensure that I am activating and mobilising the areas of the body that are particularly important. So shoulders, if we're going into breakdown, we're going to be looking at hip mobility. Likewise, I'm going to make sure that everything I do is not static stretching, like there's not a lot of value in standing still and just stretching your quad. How is that sport specific? How is that actually really preparing your athlete to run around? There's not a lot of evidence to show that static stretching improves performance, but there is probably some evidence to suggest that if we get athletes moving through movements they might do in the game, so if they have to be in a squat position in the game, let's get them doing squats in the warm-up to actually start to sort of coordinate that movement pattern and see if we can get a little bit of a development within there. This area also presents the opportunity that we call it prehab. So this would be if we want to do any isolated sort of targeted muscle development, so local muscular endurance. So we might do some glute work, we might get the mini bands out and do a 2-minute glute circuit with some single leg RDLs that targets glutes, and the whole aim of that is looking at stability of the lower limb. So in that 2 minutes, we might help our athletes reduce their chance of doing their ACL, things like that. I'm not saying there's a direct link, but as we progress that, we might then be able to strengthen our athletes in these positions. Similarly, this might be a good opportunity to put a little bit of neck isometric work in. Often, I imagine with you guys, you don't see the players very often. If we can do in 2 minutes with a resistance band, a neck circuit, using some isometrics that they can go away and do 2-3 times at home, and that will actually potentially reduce their chance of concussion going forwards, that's a really good opportunity for them with their long-term development, but also reducing their injury risk. Potentiation is the kind of final part of the warm-up, and I always think the kind of most exciting part of the warm-up, because that's the bit that's the most game-specific. So this is the bit where we'll actually maybe do some games that are really rugby-specific, and we'll challenge their coordination, we'll do some races, we'll start to bring some competition into it. So when we go out on pitch today, you'll see we've got 2 different kind of areas of potentiation we're going to look at, but both of them involve quite a rugby-specific element and a competitive element, because again, all about driving that kind of intent with that. So this I talked rather quickly, but the aim was to be out on pitch, I think that clock's wrong, for about 3:15, and it is a little bit of a walk. So the main kind of concept will be, we'll go down to pitch and I'll show you there's a group of DPP players that have arrived. We're going to run through 2 warm-ups. So this will outline, hopefully, how I've designed the warm-ups based on the session. I'm not going to explain what the 2 differences are. We'll kind of go through that on pitch and see if we can kind of unpick why I've done certain exercises, why I might have included a certain game, a certain stimulus while we're on pitch. And hopefully you'll see some of these sort of prehab elements, the sort of game-relevant activation and mobilisation, as well as some sort of potentiation and bringing a little bit of sort of rugby specificity into that final bit. On the final point though, with the evaluation, as an S&C coach, I'll always come away from my warm-up and sometimes be like, oh, yeah, that was a really good one. And then I have to be like, why was that good? What did my players actually do? But quite often I come away and I'm a little bit frustrated because I'm like, oh, that wasn't exactly how I imagined it in my head. So kind of a hot review on the field. Did I have too many players in the space? Did I allow too much time? Did I not have enough time? Did I get from it? What was the limiting factor? Was it the players' ability to sort of do the athletic skills, or was it my ability to get it across? So as you would do with a rugby session with analysis, you analyse performance. I'll always evaluate, even if it's just for 2 minutes with another S&C coach on the pitch, how I thought it went. So this week I've come off the pitch and I've gone over to Omar and been like, no, I really didn't like that. And then we have to sort of unpick why it didn't work and tweak it for the next time. So not only am I progressing the athletes' athletic skills, obviously I'm progressing my ability to coach them, to actually make it better for them. Onto this. So this is something that this has come from Omar. So Omar's obviously been with the pathway for a longer time. He's basically inviting people to participate in a survey for Leeds Beckett University, some research about perceptions of training and match load. So what you think the differences between under 18s and under 20s match loads should be and training loads should be. This is probably aimed at rugby coaches. If you're not a rugby coach, you can scan the QR code and share this with any rugby coaches that you know. We're trying to get this out to as many people as possible so we can build up a really good picture of what the girls are doing, because as you probably all know, within the women's game, there is such a huge variation in training loads and what our players are doing, and something that I've really been aware of. So I'm probably a little bit ahead of time, but a couple of minutes to get a coffee and then we'll head down to the pitch and go through the session. But if anyone's got any questions. Ooh, questions. This is fancy.
So the first one is, what exercises would you recommend for neck, traps and young women? And it's not coming up massive necks, yet this area of training could reduce whiplash, concussion injuries in the game.
Yeah, this is such a big thing actually with the whole they don't want to look massive. You get girls into the gym and you get them benching, they're like, oh, I don't want to look like the boys, I don't want to look massive. One thing I would always say to girls initially is that unless you are gymming, 5-6 times a week and eating a calorie surplus, you're never going to be that bulky. You don't have the testosterone to look like the boys do. So there's a little bit around that. That's around body image, a bit about education. So step one with that is actually educating the players that if they train hard and they train for performance, they're not just going to look bulky. They're not going to look how they don't want to. I always say to them, I always go to my train 6 days a week. I eat a lot. Do I look like bulky? Do you want to look like me? And they're like, oh, you look fine. So there's always that little bit. In terms of neck exercises that I would actually use, we tend to use a lot of the sort of banded work. So we'll start out with sort of isometrics, even isometric cluster sets. We'll target all kind of areas of the neck. We'll look at flexion, we'll look at extension, we'll do rotation. Start out really small, just 5 seconds, and gradually progress that as you would do with anything else. Start with 5, progress to 10, progress to 15, then we might increase our intensity. I'll always do some neck strengthening in specific positions as well. So with your front row, we're going to strengthen their neck actually in a scrum position. So can we do some of the neck banded resisted work while they're in a scrum position, moving across the floor?
And the other one is, if there's going to be an SSC program for CAB, will the RFU create a version for the DPP?
My aim is that what we kind of create for the CAB hopefully can be fed down into DPP, because obviously those girls are feeding into that program. There's a lot of women out there wanting to play rugby and probably with not the access to S&C support. So if we can get that out, I would love to be able to do that. Hopefully that's within my remit to get it out. But even if it's just a version of the CAV program, potentially that players can do remotely, I'd be 100% keen to get that out, and I'll look to Don and say, is that allowed? Big thumbs up. Yes, we will get something out. Great. Wonderful. All right, we're going to be down on the pitches at the back. I don't know if... Oh, I'm being pointed, signalled. Exit stage left. Yeah, we'll be down on the pitches at the back. We'll get set up. We'll go through a little bit of a couple of warm-ups, chance for questions there. But yeah, I'll see you down there.